Hello and welcome to Written Words. I'm Helen, and in today's video I wanted to talk about a rather special book that I've read recently, and that is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. If you follow me on social media, you may have seen my review that I wrote recently, but I wanted to make a video as well because there's so much to say about it. There is so much packed into this book that it was hard to fit it into just a short review. So I thought I would make one of my more than a book review videos on The Grapes of Wrath. There were so many things that I loved about this book. The descriptions, the characters, the themes, the structure, and possibly most of all, the language is just beautiful. It's not a light read, it's a very difficult story with a lot of food for thought in it, but it is a beautiful book, beautifully written. The Grapes of Wrath is the story of one particular family, the Joad family, but it's also the story of an entire people and of humanity as a whole. It can be read on many different levels. In the story, we follow the Joad family in their journey across America in search of the means to survive. They are a farming family from Oklahoma. But as a result of the Dust Bowl disaster, they lose their livelihood. And they find themselves having to travel across America in a truck that barely works, all the way to California, where they have been promised that there will be work. But as we follow the Joad family's story, their predicament is put into a wider historical context. The events take place against the backdrop of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl disaster of 1930s America. So this is a period between two world wars. It's a period of economic hardship, and it was a very difficult time for farming families in Oklahoma. As a result of the Dust Bowl, which was partly due to human factors and partly due to natural events, there were huge dust storms across the region for a long period of time, which meant that the farmers' crops were decimated. And because their crops failed, they lost their livelihood. And because they lost their livelihood, they could no longer pay the rent for their land. And so the banks stepped in and reclaimed the land, leaving them homeless. And this happened to thousands upon thousands of families around Oklahoma at that time. Around the same time, on the other side of the country in California, the land was very fertile and the weather was very good and the crops were growing very well. So when the families in Oklahoma read leaflets telling them about the availability of work on farms in California, they all decided to go there in search of work and the means to earn a living. However, what they found when they got there was not the promised land that they had been expecting. Life in California was very different, whereas in Oklahoma the farms had been mainly run by families and they were run for the purposes of earning a living, whereas in California the farms were part of huge business conglomerates and they were surrounded by fences, protected by guards with guns. And although there was a need for migrant workers to help harvest the crops, there was nowhere near as much work as there were people come to find it. And the result of this was that the wages became lower and lower and lower as the competition for jobs increased. And because of that, the difference between rich and poor becomes much starker. The opening chapter of the book describes the Dust Bowl disaster in the most evocative language. Steinbeck says, "The dawn came, but no day. In the grey sky a red sun appeared, a dim red circle that gave a little light, like dusk. And as that day advanced, the dusk slipped back toward darkness, and the wind cried and whimpered over the fallen corn. So already, even in this opening description, there is a lot of emotion going on. We haven't met any people yet, but still the landscape and the elements and the crops growing in the fields are full of emotion. Let's take a look now at the characters. The main characters in the book are, of course, the Joad family. So we have Ma and Pa, the mother and father of the family, and we have the grandparents. Then we have the Joad children, most of whom are of adult age now. There are the brothers Tom, Al and Noah, and their sister Rose of Sharon, also known as Rosa Shawn, who is pregnant, and her husband Connie. And then there are Ruthie and Winfield, the two younger children, and also Uncle John, who comes along as well. And then there are other characters they meet along the way, most notably Casey, who is a former preacher, and Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, who they meet on the roadside at a particularly crucial moment. As I was reading the book, for most of the time, I considered Tom, the older brother, to be the main character in the story. He is the first of the characters we meet, and we see much of the story through his eyes. When Pa becomes disillusioned and loses his impetus, Tom steps up as the driving force of the family and keeps everybody together. And he has quite a lot of practical knowledge, particularly with regard to cars, which he acquired when he was in prison. However, eventually it becomes clear that Ma is the main character, really. Ma is the one who is actually holding the family together. And her character development is a theme in itself. At the beginning of the book, Ma is concerned only with looking after her family, as she calls them, and she is the rock who keeps that family together. We are told she seemed to know, to accept, to welcome her position, the citadel of the family, the strong place that could not be taken. And since old Tom and the children could not know hurt or fear unless she acknowledged hurt or fear, she had practiced denying them in herself. So by practicing being a strong person, some of that strength rubs off onto the rest of the family. However, as the story progresses and the family is tested more and more, Ma begins to show signs of cracking, and her family-centred world is extended to encompass anyone who is in need, as epitomised in the final scene. So that's a little bit about the characters. I mentioned that the book's themes are very interesting too, and there are a lot of them. So here are a few that particularly resonated with me. First of all, the theme of religion is very interesting in the way that it is handled in the book. Steinbeck's own views on religion are made very clear, mainly through the character of Casey, who seems to be representing Steinbeck in the story. Casey meets Tom on his way back from prison when he's looking for his family, and the two become very good friends. Casey was a preacher, but his ideas on religion have changed over time, and throughout the book we get little glimpses of his thought process and his views on religion. And over time he has developed a faith of his own, based on his observations of real life and people and their needs. At one point he says, "Maybe it's all men and all women we love. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit, the human spirit, the whole shebang. Maybe all men got one big soul everybody's a part of." Now I sat there thinking it, and all of a sudden I knew it. I knew it so deep down that it was true, and I still know it. Religion is also portrayed as an important source of comfort, although not necessarily in the conventional way. And it provides the characters with a much needed source of solace and structure and groundedness in an otherwise precariously unpredictable existence. Even though God himself doesn't necessarily put in an appearance. Sometimes just the action of reciting a prayer or copying out a Bible verse is enough in itself, even if the people don't really understand the words themselves or perhaps misquote them too. Perhaps the biggest theme in the book, though, is humanity and what it means to be human. And the whole book contrasts humanity with the impersonal, cold nature of big business. So humanity lies at the book's heart, and the heroes of the book are the ones who display the most humanity, while the villains can be anything which threatens that humanity and threatens to take it away, be that a person, a tractor, a bank, or an entire system. Near the beginning of the story, when the family's land is repossessed and tractors are sent out to plough the land and clear the families away, we are told, "The bank is something else than men. It happens that every man in a bank hates what the bank does, and yet the bank does it. The bank is something more than men, I tell you. It's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it." So in this case, it's the bank that is the opposite of humanity. Then, when the family arrives in California and they see how different it is there, and the huge gap between rich and poor becomes apparent, and when they realise the injustice of a system where crops are being destroyed because they're not profitable, whereas on the other side of the fence families are starving to death, we find lines like this. "And in the south he saw the golden oranges hanging on the trees, and guards with shotguns patrolling the lines, so a man might not pick an orange for a thin child. Oranges to be dumped if the price was low." So all this difference between rich and poor, and the build-up of migrants unable to find any work and unable to earn enough to feed their families, leads to a growing feeling of discontent. And this is where the title comes in, The Grapes of Wrath. The image of the grapes of wrath is an interesting one. Grapes are one of the many crops harvested by the migrant workers. But these figurative grapes of wrath embody the growing feeling of unrest among the increasingly large and increasingly desperate workforce. Steinbeck says, "And in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage." But this is not Steinbeck's original image. He has actually taken this image from the Bible. In the book of Revelation, there is a story where an angel has been sent down to earth with a sharp sickle in order to harvest the grapes from earth. And then those grapes are put in the winepress of the wrath of God. "And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. And that Bible image occurs in another place in American culture too. The grapes of wrath feature in the very famous hymn, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was an American patriotic song from the time of the American Civil War. It was written by Julia Ward Howe in 1862, and the first verse contains these lines. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. So that is a very famous and very well-known hymn, and a very famous and a very well-known image. So when Steinbeck used it in his book, it would have been very familiar to its first readers, as indeed it still is now. So in this particular book, the grapes of wrath represent the growing resentment of the workers. And the more workers who arrive in California, and the lower the wages they are given for the work, and the more the work becomes scarce, the more this unrest grows. It's boiling and bubbling and fermenting under the surface all the time. But I did find the image a little bit misleading. I got the feeling that some rebellion, some huge event was around the corner, and I was expecting some kind of major upheaval or revolution even at the end. Whereas what happens is actually very different. It's possible that I was also partly misled by the cover on the front of my copy, which shows a rebellion taking place. Inside it says this is a piece of art called We Demand by Joe Jones. So it wasn't originally done just for this book. It is a painting in an art gallery, and somebody decided it would be appropriate for this. But perhaps that, combined with this imagery of unrest, led me to think that something cataclysmic was going to happen. But without saying too much, it ends in a very different way. And staying with the grapes for a moment longer, there is another contrast, because these figurative grapes are ready to be made into a figurative wine, a wine produced from corporate grapes. Whereas on the other hand, we have a different kind of liquid. We have milk. And milk represents something different. We have the saying, milk of human kindness. Milk is full of nutrition. It's what babies need to survive. And it does feature at a very crucial moment in the story, but that's all I'm going to say about that one. So in addition to the characters and the themes, the structure of the book is also very interesting. Most of the story is about the Joad family. So we see them at home in Oklahoma at the beginning of the story. Then we travel with them in their truck across America. And then we stay with them when they arrive in California. And we experience everything they experience when they're there. However, from time to time, Steinbeck slots in a different chapter that's written in a very different style and provides a kind of commentary on not just what is going on in the Joad family, but in the wider historical context. And that's where we learn some of the history. It's where we learn some of Steinbeck's views on all kinds of things. Some of Steinbeck's views are stated outright, but some of them are presented using some interesting imagery too. And perhaps my favourite of those was the image of the turtle. The turtle appears at the beginning of the story and then comes back a couple of times too. We're told that turtles instinctively head southwest. For their whole lives they feel a pull to the southwest. And this determines the whole course of their lives. Nothing can change their minds. Nothing can make them stray from their urge to travel southwest. So of course Steinbeck is comparing the turtle to the plight of the human beings who are travelling effectively southwest across America too. They have no choice. They have nothing where they came from. So in order to survive, they have to travel, and they are promised that what they need is at the end of their journey. So they have to follow their instincts. So here is a little bit of the beginning of the turtle episode. And over the grass at the roadside, a land turtle crawled, turning aside for nothing. dragging its high domed shell over the grass. His hard legs and yellow-nailed feet threshed slowly through the grass, not really walking, but boosting and dragging his shell along. The barley beards slid off his shell, and the clover burrs fell on him and rolled to the ground. His horny beak was partly open, and his fierce, humorous eyes, under brows like fingernails, stared straight ahead. He came over the grass, leaving a beaten trail behind him, and the hill, which was the highway embankment, reared up ahead of him. For a moment he stopped, his head held high. He blinked and looked up and down. At last he started to climb the embankment. As the episode goes on, we see more and more obstacles in his way. There is a steep hill. There is a busy main road with cars and trucks coming up and down. But nothing will deter the turtle from heading southwest. So we've looked at some characters. We've looked at some themes. We've talked about the structure. But perhaps my favourite part of this book was its language. It can be a very difficult task rendering colloquial language in writing, and it can very easily end up sounding patronising or unintentionally comical or even just difficult to read, and it puts readers off. A sprinkling of dialect words or regionally specific words can add a flavour of a particular region, but attempting to write accents phonetically is often best avoided. However, I do think Steinbeck does it very well here. He seems to have struck a good balance so that we're given a flavour of the region that the characters come from, but without losing its readability. In fact, I find it quite endearing when the characters speak with their regional accents. It makes me feel closer to them, as if I'm with them in the home or in the truck travelling across America. And the way the characters speak in this story is an important part of their identity. The Joad family, along with their many fellow migrants, are from Oklahoma. And upon arriving in California, they find themselves referred to as Okies, which is tantamount to a racial slur. So preserving the Oklahoma speech patterns enhances the book's vivid descriptions and creates a sense of place and, for the characters, a sense of identity. Let's look at one or two examples. Not being American myself, and not having ever visited Oklahoma, I'm not going to attempt to read these extracts in an Oklahoma accent. However, I do think that read aloud in an authentic accent, the voices of the characters would come through very, very well. So perhaps a very good audio recording of the book might be a good listen. So Ma, for example, says this: "The family had to get across. I'm tired. I'm awful tired." So I could hear a very distinct voice in my head as I read this. I could definitely hear Ma's voice, as if I was sitting across the kitchen table from her. Another time, Pa expresses his thoughts in a language that is part of who he is. He says, "They's change a-coming. I don't know what. Maybe we won't live to see her, but she's a-coming. They's a restless feeling. Fella can't figure nothing out, he's so nervous." Then Tom also bemoans the loss of his home whilst using the language of his home. He says, "Something's wrong. I can't put my finger on her. I got an itch that something's wronger 'n hell. Just this house pushed around and my folks gone." So in these three extracts we have some words like family and tard and something. And we also have an interesting use of language, because very often throughout the book, the characters refer to ideas or events or problems as she. And here we have it a couple of times. Pa says, "She's a-coming. Maybe we won't live to see her." He's not talking about a woman, he's talking about an event. And then Tom does it too. He says, I can't put my finger on her. He's not talking about a woman, he's talking about a thought. He can't think what it might be that's wrong. He can't put his finger on it. So, as I said, obviously I'm not American and I've never been to Oklahoma, so I can't comment on the accuracy of this representation of the speech patterns. But I certainly did find it endearing and I didn't find it difficult to read. Personally, I did find that the language enhanced the story rather than detracting from it. I'd be interested to know what other people think if you are American, possibly from Oklahoma. Is this an accurate representation of the way people spoke in the 1930s, or is it a bit of a caricature? Or if you're not American and you've read this book, did you find it easy or difficult to read? So those are just a few of my many thoughts on The Grapes of Wrath. If you haven't read it, I do, of course, highly recommend it. If you enjoy light reading, it's not for you. If you enjoy a book with a happy, life-affirming, positive ending, it's not for you. But if you enjoy a book that is deep and gives you lots of food for thought, then definitely have a go. This is the first book that I've read by Steinbeck, but I have heard from a number of people that his other books are well worth reading too, in particular East of Eden and Of Mice and Men. So I think at some point I will be seeking those out and giving those a go too. So I thought I would end with a little related writing prompt. In The Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck manages to evoke a very definite sense of place, both in his descriptive passages and in the characters' conversation. He does it through the way he describes things, and he does it through the language that the characters use as well. So, for this writing prompt, have a go at writing 2 scenes about life in the place where you live. Write one of the scenes through the eyes of a narrator, describing what they can see, the scenery, the people, the weather, everyday events, whatever they might be able to observe. Perhaps this narrator might be an outsider who's come to this place from elsewhere. And then for the other part, write a conversation around a family dinner table. Give the conversation a regional flavour that reflects the way people speak in that place. If you have a go at the writing prompt and are feeling brave enough to share it, please feel free to share it either in the comments below this video or on my social media. So if this video has inspired you to go away and read The Grapes of Wrath, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And if you have already read it, do feel free to share any of your thoughts on the book too. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And in the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.